Thank you very much. And I'd like to now introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker it's an honor to have him, in all sincerity, Rabbi Kahn. He received his rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva University's Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, where he studied with Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. He graduated Yeshiva University with a BA in psychology and an MS degree in Talmud. He's the director of the foreign student programs at Bar-Ilan University, where he's also a senior lecturer in Jewish studies. He's a senior educator at Eshat Torah College. He was, I'm sorry, in the past tense, my mistake. And also at Matan, as far as I remember.
Also past tense.
Okay. He authored hundreds of articles and is also an author of Explorations, an in-depth analysis of the weekly Torah reading, and Emanations, an in-depth analysis of Jewish holidays. His publications include the 5-volume, very worthwhile reading, Echoes of Eden, published by the OU and Geffen Publishing. Well worth reading, because many rabbis who I know, Ari is certainly one of the deepest thinkers with tremendous knowledge. A very short personal note about Ari before I turn this over to him. I met him, or I saw him the first time about maybe 20 years ago at a Discovery Seminar in Jerusalem, in the Old City, at Eshat Torah. And I went there primarily because I was curious about the Torah codes. And at the end of all the lectures, Ari came in and he said, mostly to very young people, that he'd like to show them Bet HaMidrash, but he can't, there's not enough time. But he told 3 stories about his rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik. And the stories were about a man, a great man, who was on an egoless search for truth, without any compromises. That really made a tremendous impression on me. The last thing is about Ari. After this encounter, I asked to meet him, we discussed something, and he recommended that I should read Halachic Man, Ish Halacha. And that also made a big impression on me. It provided a different view of Judaism for me, especially one of the phrases where Rabbi Soloveitchik repeated many times that the aspiration of Halachic Man is to create and to create worlds. That's a thought that I never heard before, and that stays with me forever. Ari Kahn, thank you very much for joining us.
So, just to explain why I agreed to speak, aside from Larry insisting, I did not know Dr. Kranzler, but I did go to college with his son Moshe. And if you noticed when I graduated, which classes I took, you'll realize he was in all the same classes with me. Furthermore, my mother-in-law typed his books. I was going to bring one of them today, Mrs. Linder. So I was going to bring one of the books today and show the inscription, but instead I have my papers. Speaking about the Holocaust is daunting. Speaking about somebody who wrote about the Holocaust is daunting as well. We live in a generation today that I teach young people. I teach people 18, 19 years old, and it's a different world. I remember growing up in Brooklyn in the 1960s. I was born, today's my birthday, okay? I can tell you exactly how old I am. So, born 57 years ago in Brooklyn, New York, there were the kids in school who had American-born parents, and then there were kids in school who had the European-born parents. And more often than not, the European-born parents were the ones who went through the war. Nobody ever said which war, but it was the war. And it didn't take that much time later for no longer to have children who were school age. But my younger brother, a little bit later, that there were no more children anymore, because the people who survived the war were considerably older. And if you go 5 years before this, then it was even more. And I remember being shocked in my parents' shul. My father was a rabbi in a shul in Brooklyn, Bensonhurst. And again, you were the Americans and then the Europeans. And then every now and again, you would hear stories about that you just didn't know. Mr. Goldberg and Mrs. Goldberg, that's not the first marriage, but they look like just No, they both had, before the war, they both had others, and they had children, and they both lost their children. And this came as such a shock growing up in this wonderful United States of America, where we have all kinds of freedom to imagine a whole other world. And we were protected by it, because in the 60s, that I remember at least, and the 70s, there wasn't that much talk about the Holocaust. There was silence. And I actually once read an article that there were a number of factors, obviously. Things like this don't happen because of one. You can have one historian who decides, I'm going to write a book, and popular books as well as serious books, which is incredibly important for serious historians to write popular books as well. But it's not just one person, it's a whole bunch of factors as well. One of the factors that I read about was that in the early 70s, the movie Roots came out. And you had a whole bunch of African Americans looking back at their own past and trying to understand their own pain. And at some point, Jews said, we need to do this as well. We cannot leave this in silence. And now I'm an educator at a time, and I tell my students this, that God willing, they're all going to live long and productive lives, and they will live into a world and a generation, there will be no more survivors. None at all. And if we're having Holocaust denial in this generation, can you imagine what happens when there's no longer any survivors left? And therefore their responsibility is compounded, much more than the responsibility that we have. Because all that we have is to pass on from people who were there and stories that we heard firsthand. And I can tell you personally that most of my family escaped. But that includes a grandfather who never saw his parents after the age of 16. So I want to, everything I'm saying here is an appreciation for Dr. Kranzler, who, by the way, I mentioned to my father this morning. He goes, yeah, I remember him. So apparently my father was friendly with him. And I want to focus on something actually from popular culture, and not a book, from a movie. A movie I never saw, which you can be mad at me or not afterwards, but Schindler's List. One of the taglines in Schindler's List, and I want to bring a little quote over here. One of the quotes that came up on the screen was, whoever saves one life saves the entire world. Whoever saves one life saves the world entire, is the way that they wrote it. One of the last scenes in the film, as Schindler prepares to flee from the Allies, the Schindler Juden give Schindler a gold ring made from gold fillings, engraved with the above quotation from the Talmud, the book of Jewish law. After the Allied victory, Schindler is a hunted war criminal. When the workers hear he must flee, they make him the ring as a small token of their appreciation, knowing there's no way to repay the gift of life. Stern presents the ring to Schindler, telling him the quotation from the Talmud. The Jews want Schindler to know that by saving them, he has saved humanity. The quotation supports the theme that one man can make a difference. If even one man shows humanity to another, he demonstrates the continuing existence of humanity in society, something utterly void of the actions of the Nazis during the Holocaust. For society to continue, selflessness and kindness must exist. As long as one good person exists, good still exists in the world. The Schindler Juden want Schindler to have a constant reminder of the goodness in him, and understand that he now needs their help. They give him with the ring a signed statement swearing to his good actions, hoping to help the Allies if the Allies capture him. These 8 words, one of the taglines for the film and its marketing, captures the sentiments of the entire film. Now, Schindler, it's very specific that I wanted to speak about him and wanted to speak about this. Because if you look through the titles of Dr. Kranzler's books, there are many about rescue. And many about rescue deal with Jews who helped with rescuing other Jews, and non-Jews who helped rescuing other Jews. And that is actually exactly the issue that I wanted to bring up. And this is going to be Dvar Torah, just in case anybody's not sure, but will be Dvar Torah. After the movie came out, in certain internet discussions, some reviews as well, people attacked it because of this line. Because he was accused of misappropriating the line or misstating it. Because that's not what it says in the Talmud. If you open up the Talmud Bavli, page 37, or the Mishnah's Perek Daled, Mishnah Hay, it says, Shekola ma'abed nefesh achad mi Yisrael. Whoever takes a Jewish life, is as if he's destroyed the entire world. And then it continues to say, "V'kol makayim nefesh achat miYisrael," and whoever saves a Jewish life, alav hakatuv ki'ilu kiyam olam maleh, as if he saved the entire world. So therefore, the makers of the film were accused of selectively quoting or taking out of context or leaving out a key word, making it sound a little more palatable to a larger audience, and saying, well, which is it? Is it whoever saves a world, a life, or whoever saves a Jewish life? So, being Jews and sitting in Jerusalem, we can say to ourselves, well, what do we care? It's only about Jewish lives, and that's not really the case. And especially, I think one of the messages needs to be that there were non-Jews who put their lives in danger to save Jews. Then how exactly can our value be that only Jewish lives are lives of value? And just in case anyone thinks is going to accuse me now of some kind of a postmodern, where it doesn't make a difference what it says in the text, we can make up any text that we want. There's intrigue here. I'm right now just about finished putting out a book, which I won't say that much about, except it's co-authored with somebody who's far more prominent than I am. And I put this quote in the book, and I put it exactly like it was in the movie. And I gave the citation. Now there's a problem for that. What's the problem? The problem is it's not what it says. It says whoever saves a Jewish life. So it is a Jewish life, or is it a life? So of course one of the editors along the way caught me and says, well, why are you giving such an obscure source? It says in the Talmud. So let me back down a little bit and explain to you what the issue is, and I'd like to try to resolve it as well, if it's possible. If you open up the Jerusalem Talmud and you open up the Babylonian Talmud and you look at the Mishnah in each. Now, just in case you're about to be surprised, well, the Mishnah is the Mishnah. The Talmud discusses the Mishnah. The Talmud are discussions on the Mishnah. So, of course, the two Mishnahs are the same. And I would say, of course, except the cases that they're not. You say, and you look at me and say, how could this possibly be? Well, there's all kinds of reasons why this can possibly be, and one has to be very careful with what exactly is authentic and what exactly is the results of a printing press. So therefore, at which point did printers fix things? Or at which point did printers give over exactly what it said in the manuscripts? So I'm not going to give an in-depth talk on manuscripts, on every single manuscript ever existed, but I will say the following. If you open up the Babylonian Talmud and most versions of the Mishnah when you get home and look what's on your shelf, you will indeed find it says, whoever saves a Jewish life. Okay, that's true. If you open up the Jerusalem Talmud, and now this doesn't make a difference if it's one which was printed in Venice or one which was printed in Vilna, you will find it's missing that word. And it says, whoever saves a life. Which then leaves me with the question, so which is the authentic read of the text, which I think I know, but leave that for a moment. Instead of using the printing press, if you went and looked at manuscripts throughout the Middle Ages, you will find that, well, the following situation. The overwhelming, and by the way, this is counterintuitive, the overwhelming printed books after the printing press all say whoever saves a Jewish life, while the overwhelming manuscripts say whoever saves a life. And you would have thought the opposite, because you would have thought that we would want to be a little bit more universal when it gets published and therefore would have more access to it. But that's actually the situation. As I said, I want to resolve this. But the Rambam is particularly interesting. Although before I get to the Rambam, there was somebody named Rabbeinu Hananel, who lived a very long time ago in North Africa. And he writes, this comes to teach us, Shekol ha'mabed nefesh, whoever takes away a life, Ke'ilu mabed olam alei, as if he's destroyed the entire world. V'chol ha'makayim nefesh achat miYisrael, and whoever saves a Jewish life, which means he just cut it right down the middle over here. If you take away any life, but if you save a Jewish life. Now, was this deliberate? Was this a mistake? But this is interesting. The Rambam, in laws of murder and preservation of life, and that in itself, by the way, should be interesting. The Rambam wrote them together. Laws of murder and preservation of life. That whenever there's a murderer or attempted murderer, we have an obligation to save the life. By the way, is that a strong enough statement? That's how he almost starts the whole thing. In the first chapter he writes, Haroa rodef achachaver lahargo, if you see somebody chasing after somebody to kill them, or any other outrages that somebody may do, and I'm skipping a little bit, and you don't do anything, you had the opportunity to save somebody, and you did not fulfill that opportunity, harei bitel mitzvah taseh. You just now broke or missed the opportunity to do a positive commandment. Va'avar shnei lavin, and you broke two prohibitions in the Torah. Lo techosei necha, in a sense, don't close your eyes. V'lo tamad adam recha, don't stand in your brother's blood. So the Rambam says, if you can help, you're obligated to help. There's no discussion. And then the next law he writes, Afal pisha in lokan alavin elu, even though we don't actually give punishment in a court for these things, the technical reason, you only punished when somebody did a prohibition if there was an action. There's no action here, so it's a technicality. You don't punish for non-action. But he goes, nonetheless, these are severe prohibitions. Shekol hamabed nefesh achad miYisrael, for whoever has allowed, this is allowed because you, by not doing anything, allowed a Jewish life to be lost. Ki'ilu ibed kol olam kulo. It's as if you destroyed the entire world. But kol hamekayem nefesh achad miYisrael, whoever saves a Jewish life, ki'ilu kayem kol olam kulo, as if he saved the entire world. So the Rambam over here clearly sees Jew in the text and writes it as such. On the other hand, in the laws of Sanhedrin, the Rambam, and there's a lot to say, so I'm not going to read the entire context, but over here he quotes this teaching as well, and he says, and therefore it comes to teach you, whoever allows any human life, as if he's destroyed the entire world. Again, very clearly, the universal, anyone. As if he saved the entire world. So now we're left with a quandary, which the Rambam apparently resolves, because he's not sure what to say, if that's the case, and he writes it one way in one law, one way in another law. So now I do want to at least give you my very strong suspicion, which is the real or the authentic text, and now we can guess also what may have happened. It starts with the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is in Sanhedrin. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin addresses the issue of warning that you would give potential witnesses, especially in capital cases, to inform them of the severity of the situation and the responsibility which they have. Within this context, I'm going to again read part of this Mishnah. Dini nefashot damu v'dam zarotav tluyim bo ad sof olam. That if you either bear false witness or you don't give testimony when you have it, which is another way of saving somebody's life or standing on someone's blood, it says you're responsible for their lives and all their children and all the generations who perhaps would never be born. And how does he know this? Shekain matzinu b'Kayin sharaget achiv. For this is what we find when Cain killed his brother. Shenemar demei achicha tzoakim. So what troubles the Mishnah is it didn't say in the singular, it says in the plural. Your brother's bloods, as it were. So why is this plural? It should say the blood. Einu omer dam achicha el dmei achicha. Damo v'dam zarotav. He and his descendants. The Mishnah gives another possible reading that the blood was all over the place. And that's why only one person was created. To tell you whoever destroys one life, and here's our two readings. The Bavli continues Israel, and the Rishalmi continues without any qualification whatsoever. So now I ask you, so which is the authentic text? Is the authentic text originally it said Israel and somebody took it out at some point? Or is the original text that it said just whoever a life, and then somebody stuck in Israel along the way? And I think this is an important question, and I also think I know the answer. So what do you think the answer is? Or you're afraid to guess? It's very easy, actually. There's what we would call a proof text being offered. The proof text is studying, giving a case. Which means if it wanted to try to prove that it specifically a Jewish life is of incredible value, there were other verses it could have quoted. The Mishnah talked about Cain and Abel, Cain and Hevel. Cain and Hevel were not Jewish. It's very difficult to use Cain and Hevel as the proof and then say just a Jewish life. This is anyone's life. He says that's why the world was created with one person. This is a universal teaching. Which actually then could mean that we have something very sad happened along the way through the Middle Ages, or even antiquity. That is, this was being taught, maybe Jews went through so much suffering and so much pain and suffered through so much abuse that at some point they had to qualify this and say, people killing us are barbarians, how can we possibly leave this in its open-ended sense? And at some point someone decided it was just much more intuitive that this should be a Jewish life. But I'm going to say it again, that doesn't seem to me to be the authentic read of the Mishnah. The authentic read of the Mishnah is a life. So now you realize why the Rambam was so interesting, why he can quote this in two different places and quote it in two different ways. Was he aware of this? Perhaps he was. Again, much more work would need to be done to go through manuscripts of not just of every text I'm talking about, and not just using printed, and that's sources, and that's obviously beyond what we're doing now. But I think that the message is a very important message. That we know that the Holocaust was a time that Jews can lose faith in humanity. And all those who didn't lose faith in God, so what's the alternative? You lose faith in humanity. I think sometimes it's easier to blame God without getting into theology more than necessary. It's very easy to lose faith in humanity. But then, there were humans, there were people, there were Jews, and there were non-Jews who sensed the humanity of every single person, and whether they ever learned this passage or not, they knew this passage. And part of what Dr. Kranzler did with his academic work was to teach us about so many more of these people, and teach us about the work that they did, and teach us how they understood that every single life has value, and every single life is an entire world. So I'll just say that it's my honor to be able to speak here and to share these words, and I thank you for allowing me to do this.